The Sabbath is the seventh day of the week, basically. This was an ordinance put into play by God at creation. When God created the heavens and the earth, they created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and Scripture says on the seventh day, God rested. It wasn't because he was so tired. It was just because he was setting into play this ordinance of the Sabbath. In your notes, the Sabbath was a promise of rest, saying that you can toil, you can work, but after that comes rest. Later on in the wilderness, God gives the commandments to Moses, and the fourth commandment was to honor the Sabbath day. And so they were to keep the Sabbath day holy. They were not supposed to work on the Sabbath day. When God provided manna for them, they were not allowed to collect it on the Sabbath day. They were supposed to collect it the day before. This is the seventh day of the week. This is our Saturday. It was the last day of the week, and they were to keep that day holy. There was a guy in the Old Testament, and he knew this law, and he went out and just decided he was going to pick up some sticks. He was going to gather some wood for firewood. And the whole community saw this, and they asked God what they should do. And as horrible as it sounds, they ended up putting him to death for violating this rule of the Sabbath. Well, as the years went by, they would ponder the question, what does it mean to work? What does it mean to work? And so the Sabbath then became, they instituted 39 different categories of rules for what work meant. That all these different categories like planting and plowing and reaping and sewing clothes and skinning animals and writing down things, or even completing something. Like you couldn't complete anything. And out of these 39 rules, there was all these sub-rules, and you would have to study them. And even to this day, many of these rules, they have to figure out what the modern implications are. For example, on the Sabbath day, it is unlawful for them to start a fire, so that actually prevents Jews from driving in an automobile, because to crank up the car in an internal combustion engine would be creating a fire. Some of you say, well, that's okay, I've got an electric car. Well, to start the electric car, you have to complete a circuit, and there is no completion either allowed on the Sabbath day. You know, you're not allowed to unattach something from something else. Not even if it's perforated, you can't detach something. So that means we're going to get a little talking dirty here for a second, okay? If you're going to the bathroom, you can't rip off the toilet paper, okay? So you'd have to prepare in advance, and you'd have to rip it all off into the right size pieces, so that on the Sabbath on the Sabbath day you couldn't do it. Or you could bring Kleenex, apparently, because you're not ripping anything. It's like the level of detail that they would think through. You can't carry something from a private domain into a public domain. That means that you couldn't carry something for more than a few steps off of your own property. So if you had a child, if you had a purse, if you had something that you were carrying somewhere, you couldn't carry that off of the property. And as you can imagine, that becomes very, very cumbersome. Like, how can you go anywhere if you can't carry anything with you? So in Jewish fashion, they started gathering around and saying, well, what does this really mean? And what loopholes can we make? So they decided that if they put a wall around the city, that they could declare the entire city as a private area, and then you could move freely within the city on a Sabbath, carrying whatever you wanted, because now it's essentially private property. Well, as you can imagine, as time progressed and as technology progressed, it became increasingly difficult to build walls around cities. So they said, you know what? Somebody decided, I don't know who decided, that we'll make a virtual wall, a symbolic wall of sorts. And so they have something called an eruv. And an eruv is a wire that goes around a city, symbolically representing a wall. The largest one is in Manhattan. It's about 18 foot up, and it goes 18 miles around Manhattan Island. It costs them around $100,000 a year to maintain this wire. But this eruv makes sure that all of Manhattan is considered a private area. So they can walk anywhere they want to. They can carry whatever they want to as long as they're within the confines of this wire. There's over 200 of these across North America. And every week on Thursday, a rabbi drives the entire length, making sure it is intact and it has not broken, because if it broke, well, then they would not be able to move freely throughout their city. The Sabbath day. Another thing that some people of the Jewish faith would do is they would have someone called a Sabbath goy. And what a Sabbath goy was a non-Jew that they could basically have around to do all the things that they couldn't do themselves. So they would have them be there, and they could turn on the lights, and they could cook, and they could do all these things. The problem was you can't tell them what to do on the Sabbath, but you would have to tell them in advance what you want done and when you wanted it, and then they could do that. Some notable Sabbath goys was Elvis Presley, Colin Powell, and the former president Barack Obama were Sabbath goys, going around and doing the things that the Jewish people could not do. Elevators. You can't push a button on an elevator on the Sabbath because you're completing a circuit. So many elevators in the city have what they call a Sabbath mode, means it stops at every single floor, so you don't have to push a button when you board. Imagine getting to the 37th floor, having to wait at every floor to get there.